discussion, then we go home, we think about it, and then we go to the movie theater. And that's our life, basically. So no, I'm joking. It can be hard, but as we used to say when I was a graduate student, always better than working. But no, I mean, jokes aside, this student of mine is trying to say that work should be a concern for justice. The quality of work should be an independent concern of justice. So why did I say that? Okay, yes, because Tasiulas, in a sense, has an even stronger argument. Because think about the possibility of organizing work in a society in such a way that the least attractive jobs are shared among the citizens in such a way that it's not the case that someone has to clean toilets all day long and the others have to speak about philosophy all day long for their entire life. So let's imagine that we can find a way of alternate our, dirty jobs in such a way that this is not too costly for the efficiency of the system. I mean, it's a big if. Imagine, you have prepared a surgeon for 30 years to perform a very good operation on yourself. At 5 o'clock, it starts the moment he has to clean the toilets. So it looks like the Cultural Revolution in China, basically. That, that there was this idea that the intellectuals should also be peasants and should also do manual work because everybody is equal. So it's not the case that you talk about philosophy and other people clean the toilets. You also have to clean the toilets. So, but let's leave aside. Let's imagine that it's okay that the system works. There is not so much loss of efficiency if we share the burden of unwelcome, dirty jobs in the society. Now, if Tasiulas is right, having this system of distribution of heavy burdens in the society becomes a human right. Because if it's not if the condition is just that there are not excessive burdens on duty bearers, and we have allowed that we have a system that works quite well, in which the surgeon cleans the toilets, and in which the philosophy professor grows tomatoes, and so on and so forth, which is a very nice activity, by the way. In fact, it's my hobby. But if we imagine that this is possible, then each of us has a human right to have a job that is not too boring, that is not too burdensome. I mean, to me, is another counterintuitive consequence. If we think that human rights are about protecting, important stuff, now we are making human rights something that is not even yet provided by the most advanced political systems that we have today on earth. Because even in liberal democracies, you don't have a right not to have a boring job. It could be wrong. That's the point of my student. But she doesn't make a point about human rights, she makes a point about liberal justice. So it could be the case that in liberal democracy, we have to start thinking about the quality of the job that each citizen takes. And stop thinking that we can adjust that only by compensating, which, by the way, we don't do, because even if you do a boring job, it's not the case that people are going to compensate you just because it's boring. But leaving aside, so the problem with Tasiulas' suggestion, it seems to me, that it makes the inflation of human rights even worse than what it is today, because it makes human rights, it transforms certain things into human rights that are not even conceived as rights in liberal democracies. Most of the people think that human rights should be a subset of liberal democratic rights. In this case, they become a bigger set compared to liberal democratic So, now I have to say that classifying Casiulas in the instrumentalist camp is not perfectly correct. Because on the one hand, he has this idea that human rights have to protect goods, have to protect things that human beings need, leaving open the list of the goods, unlike other philosophers. But on the other hand, he explicitly rejects the idea that merely focusing on the goods that humans need is going to be sufficient to deliver a convincing foundation. He thinks, more in an orthodox mood of thinking, more getting closer to the orthodox school, that human rights and our entitlement to these goods that human rights are meant to secure ultimately rest on, quote, the intrinsically valuable status equally possessed by all human beings. So, human dignity and human interest, concludes Casiulas, are equally fundamental grounds of human rights. So he thinks you have to make a reference to what people need, and that's what makes him an instrumentalist, but you also have to make a reference to human dignity, and this is what makes Casiulas an orthodox. You cannot do without each of the two, presumably because if you only focus on interest, you don't explain why something that I need becomes something that I have a right to. Start noticing the jump. I mean, it is one thing to say that I need to be loved in order to have a good life. It is a different thing to say that I have a right to be loved. Whereas the instrumentalists conflate this distinction. So, on the other hand, you cannot do without a reference to human interest and focus only on human dignity. Because if you focus only on human dignity, Casiulas thinks, then you cannot spell out what human rights are. Yeah, okay, let's imagine that we all agree that we have dignity. Okay, so what human rights should we have? Simply because we are worthy beings. Casiulas thinks you need to make a reference to what we need, to what these worthy entities need in order to arrive to a list of human rights. Otherwise, you don't get there. So he thinks you need both. Now, let me say why this twofold grounding of human rights is not very convincing, and then we make a first break. Probably we should do 2 breaks.
If you want to.
No. Let me finish this, and then we can stop. Okay, so both pillars, I think, on which this double source certification rests are rather shady. When it comes to explaining the intrinsic, at least in Casiulas' approach, when it comes to explaining the intrinsically valuable status that humans have, not to mention their equal status, because it's not the same to say that that human beings are worthy, that they have dignity. It's not the same to say that they have the same dignity. No? When it comes to addressing the question what would think any foundation should address, what Casiulas does is to give us a list of features that contribute to a, quote, non-metaphysical changing definition of human natures. The ontological basis of human dignity, we are told, so the reason, I would say, why we have dignity, is that we are characterized by capacities for language use, for registering a diverse range of normative considerations, including evaluative consideration, prudential, moral, aesthetic, and others besides, and for aligning one's judgments, emotions, and actions with those considerations. So all Tassulas does to explain why we have dignity is to give us these very short ontological descriptions of what we are, and he thinks this is enough to explain why we have dignity. I'm going to anticipate that's one of the reasons why I think we need a new foundation of human rights, because I think that it's right, Tassulas is right in thinking that we need to appeal to human dignity, otherwise we are not going to be able to found human rights, to ground human rights. But at the same time, we have to do better in explaining what makes us worthy creatures. Otherwise, just mentioning the capacity for language use, for registering a diverse range of normative considerations, I don't think is going to lead us that far in justifying the fact that we have human dignity. In fact, on the question why these capacities generates any dignity for humans, Tassulas doesn't say much. Tassulas and any other orthodox thinkers, what characterized the orthodox school is that it says we cannot do without dignity. But at the same time, what characterizes orthodoxy as it is practiced today in the philosophy of human rights is that nobody is going to tell you why we have dignity or what makes us worthy creatures. So they, of course, for very easy to understand reasons, we don't say much, we don't want to say much about why we have dignity, because the moment we say why we have dignity, we start doing metaphysics. And metaphysics is divisive. Metaphysics, I can have my metaphysical view that is not your metaphysical view. Even if we, do philosophy, we know that, there is not one metaphysics of it, there is not one ontology. And what's the problem with that? That human rights are supposed to be a universal language. We cannot have an account of human rights that is good only for those who believe in one metaphysical worldview. So I understand the reasons why my orthodox colleagues do not want to say anything more than, oh yeah, dignity is important. We cannot do without dignity. They don't want to say much more than that. I understand why, but at the same time, I think that we have to look for a better understanding of our dignity, which possibly at the same time is not going to be as divisive as they think. So that's my approach at least. Okay. So that's the problem I see about one of the pillars in Tassulas' approach, that he doesn't say anything about dignity. The major problem with the other pillar is that the interests that generate human rights are potentially infinite. In fact, on Tassulas' account, any universal human interest that A, could be protected through the introduction of a corresponding human right, and B, that does not impose excessive burdens on duty bearers, should generate a corresponding human rights. Remember the condition that I gave you before. Thus, for example, if people could avoid getting bored, okay, I already said that, getting bored in the workplace, perhaps by rotating the most boring functions, and we could invent a social scheme in which this can be done without imposing too high costs on duty bearers, then there should be a human right not to get bored in the workplace, which is a rather strange conclusion given the broadly shared intuition that human rights are about setting minimal standards as opposed to promoting the good life. Finally, as pointed out by Honora O'Neill, most of the time, and in particular regarding positive human rights to goods and services, so not negative rights like freedom and so on, but positive rights, goods, material goods, Tassulas' idea that duties corresponding to human rights must be dischargeable by duty bearers, so if there is a human rights, then those who have the duty to provide that human right cannot be burdened too much, presupposes that duty bearers are easily identifiable. but it doesn't say much about how this identification should take place. Let's give an example. Who should give resources to alleviate global extreme poverty? Rich individuals, rich governments, both. And in any event, how rich do they have to become? Do they have to be become the legitimate target of a human rights obligation? So, if you link so closely the existence of a human right to the identification of the duty bearer who is supposed to discharge the obligation that comes with human rights, then you are in a very difficult position even to say that there is a human right to the avoidance of extreme poverty. Because let's assume that we agree that there is a human right to the avoidance of extreme poverty, that people should not starve, like they do today, in some parts of the world. Now, who is the duty bearer? Who is supposed to respond to this human right of people not to die of starvation? There may be very different answers here, right? I mean, the 1%, famous 1% of Occupy Wall Street, they should pay for them. The 10%, the richest 10% of the global population, the richest 10% of the wealthiest states of the world, and so on and so forth. So it's nice to have a better grasp of those who are the duty bearers of human rights. But if you make the connection too close, then you make your life difficult even to introduce things that everybody thinks should be human rights. Like everybody thinks that if someone starves, their human rights are violated. What happened here? Okay. Well, why don't we take a break now and then we come back on the rest of the journey. We still have to do the orthodox school, the political view, so it's good that we go on until 1 o'clock, because I think we need that. No, until 12, then we discuss it.
How many minutes? We 20, 30 minutes for the break?
20, 30, maybe okay, so let's.
A princípio vamos até a 1 da tarde. Vocês podem deixar coisas que eu vou pensar. Você não recebeu. É porque a gente, que tem os alunos que estão inscritos pelo programa, como disse, só um minutinho.